Hello, Team ET. Welcome to this January episode. Wow, January already. January episode of the ET Project Live. Today, I'm really excited because sitting in the seat with me all the way over in Santa Fe is Miss Ann Betz, joining us for a second time, by the way. We'll come back to that, but welcome to the ET Project, Ann. Great to have you here again.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. It's always fun talking to you. So thanks for having me back. What are
Yeah.
we talking about today?
We're going to talk about narcissists, and I know this is a favorite topic of yours. We're going to try and keep it within the theme of leadership, although we can stray outside, of course. But let me just introduce you a little bit before
Oh,
we jump
sure.
into it, because you have such a wonderful backstory and background. So you're co-founder of BEabove Leadership. I hope you're still co-founder of BEabove Leadership.
Very much.
Yeah, very good. You're an international speaker and a trainer. You've studied neuroscience. In actual fact, I think you consult, right, on neuroscience as well as leadership and coaching. You've been a professional coach for a couple of decades or more. You're an author of a really interesting research. I've done a little bit of background looking into this, but talking about the brain and its involvement within coaching. And being a coach myself and looking at neuroscience, I think it's a great paper. And you write for so many different organizations or magazines, Choice Magazine, Coaching at Work, Coaching World. I think you even write for ICF, right, for the
I
International
have,
Coaching.
yeah, I
Yeah,
have.
very
I've
good.
been doing this for a while, so I've been around. But I actually, in the most recent issue of Choice Magazine, I'm the feature article on the myths of neuroscience and coaching. And I'll tell you just a little, I've been learning to be like confident in promoting myself, which I know a lot of coaches can struggle with. So
Yeah.
I'm going to speak from there, which
Yeah.
is I was one of the very early adopters in terms of neuroscience and coaching,
Cool.
and am very much considered to be a thought leader in that space. And in the last, X amount of time, more people have come into looking at neuroscience. But, my roots go back about 12 years where there really weren't many of us talking
Yeah.
about what are these connections. And so I'm really pleased to be sort of part of the original thinkers. And I really try to stay as a thought leader in this space, which
Yeah.
has kind of brought me into this topic of what about people with personality disorders? So that's
Yeah.
been sort of an evolution of um, some of my neuroscience thinking.
Yeah. And it's a really fascinating field, and neuroscience is evolving so quickly, right? Our understanding of the
Yes.
brain and how we operate has evolved so much in the last couple of decades, but at incredible pace at the moment.
Yeah.
And I remember when we spoke last time, you have a statement around, at the moment, this is what we understand,
Yeah.
because of the fact that it does change so often. So,
It
you know,
it does change. And then the other thing that's happened that really became sort of a scandal, and we've known this for a while, but really kind of, came to a peak with some major universities, is the lack is basically fraud in science. And so
right,
there's a very well-known behavioral economist who's been called out for falsifying data. And so there's both sort of like fraud, deception, overblowing results, um, you know, stating things that are statistically significant as more significant than they are. Some of it is outright fraud. This guy was outright fraud, but some
mm,
of it is just maybe more wishful thinking or pushing the data. So I think that's the other thing that we are becoming more aware of. And the other reason I'm very, very cautious is if something is not a replicated study, we might say, indications may be going in this direction, but we
right.
can't really, bet the bank on it, because that's part of what we're finding out as well, is where have we been wrong because we believed what somebody said that wasn't maybe scientifically accurate,
Yeah.
just to
Uh,
make things more confusing.
I mean, we could go down that path and
Okay,
spend the
we
rest.
don't, and they're probably all narcissists.
But I have to ask, so from your perspective, what's the driver? Why would scientists falsify their claim? Is there so much pressure to produce, or is it the money, as you
Is this a
say?
universal signal? Is this a universal symbol? Money. Money,
Money.
money, money. Money makes the world go round. If I am so there's a couple of reasons. If
Hmm.
I am a scientist that, so one reason might be because of the pressure and the reward, carrot and stick of publication. The
Yes.
only way I'm going to get hired at a decent university is to have hits, publication hits
Hmm.
in good journals. And so and it's hard to, parse all the numbers. And that's what so what ends up happening is somebody goes in and goes, that's not what this study says. I'm going to take a level deeper. I'm going to go look at the data, and then they have to retract, which is very bad. But the reason they would falsify is to get a journal publication, because that's going to put them on track to be at the next tier of university. And some places, even there can be financial rewards for getting a publication. In some
Hmm.
countries, I won't say where. There can literally be, you get a bonus with a publication. The other reason is they want it to be true, and they're blind. So it's their own cognitive bias because it just feels so right, and they want it to be true. And maybe they don't look as carefully as they should. And even
Hmm.
a scientist is subject to cognitive biases like that. And then the other might be just a genuine mistake.
Okay.
So
I can imagine um, at a university level to actually get tenure to become
you have to have publications
have
to get, at
publication.
most places, to get tenure, you have to have publications. The more the better. So there's lots of things that go into that, but it's follow the money for the most part. The
Wow.
real outright fraud is to get a publication hit, so I'm more respected in my field, I get more consulting, or if it's a drug kind of thing, and this is where it gets really dangerous, because then I get a patent on a drug and I'm set for life. That's the holy grail for a neuroscientist, because you don't get paid very much as a neuroscientist. You're better off as a business professor, frankly.
Okay.
But if I can get a patent, if I can link my research to a drug and I can get a patent, holy mackerel, I'm set for life. Do I want to push the data to do that? Maybe.
Mm. So I think that's a really important message to start our conversation around is how do we avoid falling for the trap? Then somebody says, here's a research finding, this must now be gospel. Let's pursue that angle. How do we avoid that trap?
Well, sort of what might seem a little counterintuitive is trust people who are less confident. Not confident, but who are less dogmatic or sure.
Right.
So when I talk about this, I say things like, this indicates right now, this seems like where the research is going. I even say
Mm.
things like, as I understand it, because I am not a neuroscientist. I'm an applied practitioner and a translator. So
Mm.
if you've got someone who's being more careful with their language, I actually find them more trustworthy. Also, someone who's very willing to say, you know what, I was wrong about this. I used to think this, and now I've seen this. I find that more trustworthy than the person who's like, this is how it is. Unfortunately, we're more programmed to have more confidence in the second person because we want to be that confident ourselves. So we're like, well, Tony Robbins says that, so that must be it. Ann Betz says maybe, I don't know. I'm not comparing myself to Tony Robbins, but I trust people who are a little more nuanced in their communication, and I think all of us should. And then if you really want to get into it, you can do things like, has this study been replicated? Or, what are the counterindications? The other thing that happens in science is something called the file drawer problem. So you can have 20 studies that prove, for example, just to be controversial, antidepressants don't really work. and one study that proves that they do, that's the study that gets published. Nobody ever asks what's in the file drawer.
Okay.
It's hard to get published proving a negative. Easier to get published with the sexy new thing. Standing on your head makes you sexier. Oh, we're going to publish that. 25 studies say, yeah, there's nothing you can do to make yourself sexier. We're not publishing those. Anyway.
For obvious reasons, right? So commercial reasons. So just to close off that end of the conversation, if we are in a business context and we read something about this, what's our steps then to go further and get some confidence that we could leverage the latest finding or this report? How would we do that as a business person, not somebody involved in the scientific world?
Well, take it with a grain of salt. Just take it with a grain of salt. Do not take it as that is absolutely the truth, and don't go train it or teach it until you've verified it. That's what I would say. So somebody comes in and says that, take it with a grain of salt. If it's really interesting to you and you're like, really, do a deeper dive. Otherwise, it probably doesn't matter that much. And do not then start repeating it unless you have verified it yourself. So that'd be the easy answer. And there are things that people say that are not, they're just not totally accurate, but they're probably not going to hurt anybody. Like the idea that you have a reptile brain, that's a big neuro myth. It's a myth. If somebody comes in and trains that, and you're like, oh, my reptile brain did that, it's not really accurate, but it's not gonna hurt anything if you think of it that way. There are things that are more helpful, and you can't use it as an excuse, but there's lots of stuff where it honestly doesn't matter that much. It matters to me because I consider myself a scientist and I don't like inaccuracy. Makes me irritated. I'll give you another example. Myers-Briggs somebody tried to pull me into an online debate about this today. I don't care that much. The Myers-Briggs is not a scientifically valid assessment. It's very interesting, though, and can be a wonderful conversation. I don't care that much. I'm not going to say wipe it off the face of the earth because it's not validated. Go have fun talking about sensing and perceiving and all of that. If that helps people start to have more of an awareness of themselves, who cares? Just don't tell them it's scientific.
Yeah. So in that regard, I believe the Big Five is really...
Big Five is better. Yeah. And the latest research also is starting to point more. I love this. There's more and more research being done on personality. And I just saw a really good research study. Where was it? I think it was in Scientific American. Personality changes throughout the day. They're starting to pay more attention to how contextual we are. And that it's not about being false. It's about that we're shaped by our environment and our relationships. I'm an ambivert, and I can be very extroverted. If I am around someone who's more extroverted than I am, I will look like an introvert because I just don't want to fight for the stage that much. And so I think that's the research I'm really, even with the Big Five, I really think the contextual nature of personality is even more fascinating. How do the people and even the physical environments that we're in, call forth certain aspects of who we are?
Right.
So
we're not going to get to narcissism.
Well, personality leads us to narcissism, so maybe that's a segue.
Now, just before we jump into today's topic, we're all around it, but the one thing I didn't mention about you is that you're a published poet. So if time permits, and I hope it does, I'd love to ask you somewhere towards the end if you have a poem that you'd like to recite. I would really like to hear. So,
okay.
So if you're okay, let's jump into today's topic, which is around the narcissistic leader or leadership in general in this context, if you like. I don't know what you call these people. Like, do you call narcissism a personality, or is it a character
Yeah,
trait? What is
it's
the
there's oh my gosh, because it's a great place to start. What do you call it? Well, it's a trait, and it,
trait?
and it can and it's a continuum.
Hmm.
And it is in the diagnostic and statistical manual. If there's a lot of it, basically a lot of narcissistic behaviors, you can diagnose narcissistic personality disorders. So on that level, it's a personality disorder, but it's also a, it's a way of being. You can be narcissistic without being a full-blown narcissist. So one of the things that I have really started, I don't mind the word at all. Some
Hmm.
people do. They feel it's very labely. I think it's no more labely than saying somebody's a little neurotic,
Right.
right? You're a little
Yeah.
nerd, but it tends to imply that they have the disorder. So I like to really look at the behavior. And if I'm talking to someone, and this happens to me, I do organizational development work and organizational transformation like that. And if someone is talking to me about someone in the organization, I might say what I'm hearing is narcissistic behavior. I'm hearing narcissistic traits.
Right.
Or I might even not use that word depending on how sensitive I feel like it is politically. I
Mhm.
might just say, wow, this person sounds very entitled. They sound very rigid. They sound controlling. And I
Mhm.
might just describe the behavior.
Right.
And the more of that kind of entitlement, controlling, rigidity, diminishing other people, the
Mhm.
more you check those, the more likely you do have a full-blown narcissist. But
Okay.
I think that cuts through the, oh, you're labeling and you're not qualified to diagnose. No, but that behavior sounds very controlling. That
Mhm.
sounds very devaluing. That sounds they also can be big victims, and they also can be very vindictive,
Right.
or entitled, like, wow, that sounds really entitled. That's a
Yeah.
trait of narcissism. And so I kind of go around it that way, which I
Okay.
think helps people not just reject what I'm saying because they don't like the label.
Okay. And if I understood correctly, there's at least four types of narcissism.
There's
Is that
like
correct?
9 types.
I'm,
What are the 4 that you remember, Wayne? Like, what are the 4? And we'll see. There's a lot of different types, but go for the big ones.
and I'm now taking this from Dr. Romani. So
Dr. Ramani, yeah, accent on
Romani,
the first,
so
Ramani, yeah. Who's
um,
awesome. And for anybody who's watching, you want to watch a really cool woman talk about narcissism. Dr. Ramani Durvasula is the leading expert right now. She was at UCLA, and now she's too busy just doing her own thing, I think, but she's brilliant.
well, she just is an incredible knowledge source. Just listening to her, I can listen to her all day. She's
She
fantastic.
is, and
She,
can I just say, I'm actually really proud. She's a friend of mine, so I'm really
ah,
proud to have a relationship with her. So she's
very
awesome.
nice.
She's an
Very
awesome
nice.
human as well. Yeah.
So the four types that I heard her talking about, let me put it that way, were she was talking about the grandiose, the very
Grandiose that's the one we most generally think of. The person who's like, I'm the best and I'm the beautifulest and most beautiful, and I'm the best at everything. And there are some world leaders that fit that. We won't name them, but people can just insert their own world leader
probably
example.
don't have to name them. I think they jump out fairly quickly. So they're very, if I understand, they're very egotistical, title-driven status. They sort of stand out as
They're very
being,
easy to see.
yeah.
And the problem is until you start understanding there's different types, you think, well, this person, this leader, they don't act like that, so they
Mm,
must not be a narcissist.
Right.
And so that's why it's important to know they come in many flavors. So that's the big one.
That's the
They're
big
the
one.
easiest to see. They're like rattlesnakes shaking their rattle, right?
Yeah.
But there's other poisonous snakes. So what were the others?
The second one she mentioned was the malignant type. So um, they lie, they cheat, they steal. They're like cancer, basically.
There can be what's interesting is these are not distinct. You're grandiose and malignant.
Mm,
You can be grandiose and malignant, or you can
yes.
be grandiose and still have a very negative impact, but not be so. There's a nastiness. Malignant narcissists are actually pretty close to psychopaths
Okay.
on the continuum. So you can
Mm,
be grandiose and be a little bit, you're still going to have a negative impact, but there's a little more benign. You just want attention rather than that you want to dominate, control, and even hurt people.
mm, mm. And I was going to ask you earlier, but I forgot about it. We'll come back to it. But we probably should define the difference between the psychopath, the sociopath, the narcissists, even the Machiavellianists.
Okay, so all psychopaths and sociopaths are also narcissists,
Mm,
but not all narcissists are psychopaths or sociopaths.
mm,
Psychopath versus sociopath, psychopaths are, this is the very common, by the way, in the field, in professionals who work in this arena, there is not 100% agreement.
right.
So I am telling you my best understanding of the field, and not everybody would see it the same way. And they might
Mm,
be very, very vehement about how they see it. But in a reading of the more general literature, psychopaths are born and there's brain structure differences and there can be genetic differences. And the big difference with a psychopath is they don't feel anything. They can have cognitive empathy where they can kind of understand how people think, but they don't care. And their fear centers, and we know this from brain scans, their fear centers are very small. And so they're not afraid of being caught. And Dr. Ramani says, I love this line. She says, a psychopath can have a dead body in the trunk and get stopped by the police and their heart rate won't go up, which is
mhm,
why lie detectors don't work on them. They have no physiological response to fear. So that's why they're so dangerous.
right.
And main difference, psychopath, sociopath, most people say is psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made by abuse. However, we also know that psychopaths, even with this genetic potential and the brain structure, that may not activate as like a serial killer without the addition of abuse.
Okay.
So sociopaths may not have this, but may develop it through severe abuse. Not everybody agrees with that. Narcissists would be a step down. And one of the things is that narcissists do seem to feel fear and shame. A psychopath doesn't feel any shame.
Mm,
For a psychopath, people are bugs. It is as relevant to me if I hurt a human as if you step on an ant, unless
right.
you're a Jain Buddhist, in which case it would be as relevant. Um, so, but just a narcissist who's not all the way to that would feel, and in fact, they're driven by an avoidance of shame. The reason we talk about narcissists more is they tend to go more undetected in the general population, and there's more of them. So you're more likely to encounter that.
Mm,
Psychopaths often end up in prison, but they can also end up in the C-suite. There's actually a fair number in the C-suite because they will do whatever it takes to get there and they don't care.
mm.
High percentage. They're either in prison or they're in the C-suite.
Well, probably wealth could also add on to that in some
Yeah, and
cases.
they want I'm like, and also there's a lot of narcissists in the C-suite as well. And people ask me why, and I say, well, they want it.
Mm,
It's important to them. They will do what it takes. Whereas, I think about this client that I had, a high-level leader in a multinational organization, one of the nicest humans I ever came in to contact with, she, they kept pushing her forward. She could have gone as far as she wanted to go in that organization. And at some point she said, that's not the life that I want.
Wow.
You can't pay me enough. There's no incentive that would make me give up my life. I like playing racquetball 3 times a week and I like seeing my kids. A narcissist is like, I want that title. I don't care about my family. They're a means to an end, whatever. I want the title. And if I'm playing racquetball, it's only because I'm playing racquetball with somebody who's useful to me. That's why. Because the nice people sort of go, I don't know. I don't know if I want to do what it takes.
Very good. So the other two types that she mentions is the covert, and I know you've written an article about the differences or comparing the grandiose with the covert. So
Yeah,
what should...
the covert is like the rattlesnake without its rattle. So, and they can be hard to identify, but they are motivated by the same thing and they're just as poisonous. And what a covert will do is they will play the victim. So just like a vampire needs blood to stay alive, a narcissist needs something called supply, which if you've spent any time, that's a very commonly used word. What is supply? It's other people's energy. It can be anything from getting admiration to making people mad and getting attention that way. It's focus on them. It's energy is the only way I know how to say it. And to some degree, a narcissist doesn't care if it's positive or negative. So a covert narcissist gets your energy by playing the victim, which is why they're nasty. They can hook you in because you think, oh, this poor person, they've had such bad luck. And, let me help them. And I'll, oh, they're having a bad day. I'll do their work for them. And that's okay. And then then you sort of go, wait a minute. Why did they just take credit for my idea? What's going on here? What's really happening here? Because they've sucked you in through pity. And sometimes what happens is people who start out in life being more grandiose and getting attention because, and sometimes, nice looking and charming and like that. And then when they lose their looks or they lose some of their power, they flip and they become more of the covert victim-y type because they've got to have that attention in order to survive. So that is a really important distinction to know. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I also believe they are very sensitive to criticism. So if you criticize them, they don't respond well to that. So.
Yeah, I would say they all are. They all are. But you may be right. There may be something, the shame may be a little closer to the surface with the covert, the victim. And so they may, they get there's a whole vocabulary. You get into this, you have to learn a new language. There's a vocabulary and there's a term called narcissistic injury. And basically you may just feel like you just mentioned something like in the workplace, like you mentioned something like, hey, I've been, your reports are hard to read because the formatting doesn't really follow what we do. And then they blow up. Now, there can be other reasons why people do that. But if they get nasty, it could be narcissism. It also could be borderline personality. But if there's something wrong if somebody's like, well, I guess you do every report perfectly. You're like, what I'm trying to show you how we do this. Yeah, so right. That alone doesn't necessarily mean narcissism. But it could be that you've given them an injury. And sometimes if it's bad, if they feel the injury is bad enough, they'll go looking for revenge.
Right. Right. So
you maybe didn't mean to injure anybody. You maybe just, you might have just been saying, we tried that in Q2 last year. You weren't here. And then they feel injured. That's why they're volatile. They're just volatile. And it's people's, the impact of being around someone like this, and when they get into leadership, it's even worse than like as a colleague, is
Okay.
your nervous system cannot settle down because you don't know when they're gonna attack or criticize or devalue you or throw you under the bus. So you have to stay on alert, and it's exhausting.
It's quite
Tell
extraordinary.
me.
I'm just sitting there thinking, this is almost the whole population of the people I know that we're describing at the moment.
The ones who are on alert, or the which ones?
All of the ones we're talking about, I mean, I could always categorize, I don't know, 50, 80% of the people I know into this grouping so far. The fourth one,
Yeah,
which
the
sounds,
fourth one. What's the fourth one?
the fourth one, as I understood it, was almost the opposite of the covert. So it's the communal. It's where the people are saying, look how good I am. Look at all the great things that I've done, you know, playing out to the rest of the world or anyone that's willing to give them a
Yeah.
stage. Yeah.
You hit really the big four. There's some other, I'll mention one other one. The communal narcissist can be hard to see because
Mm.
their whole life is about doing good. You see doctors, ministers, heads of nonprofits.
Mm.
That's, and not always just them, or someone who, is always giving money and, talking about that. You can be sure, here's how you know it's a narcissist. I'm going to give you an example of someone who's not a narcissist. Our former president, Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
Jimmy Carter, at age 90, is still building houses for Habitat for Humanity, but you bet
Mm.
he's not, making a big deal about it. He does it because it's in his heart.
Right.
He does it, and he and his wife, it's that, Rosalind as well, not narcissist. They're doing it because they feel it's the right thing to do. The narcissist is the, look at me, and I built another house for Habitat for Humanity, and 5 more people are going to have a place to live because of my efforts. They're getting attention that way. And at the same time, so I had a client who was involved with someone like this, and I won't say what kind of profession he was in. But the other thing was, they did a big fundraiser. He took all the credit. They raised a couple $1 million, and it was all about, he just kept saying, my efforts. And I'm so glad I could use my efforts to do this thing for this city. Me, me, me. She said, as she's at the ceremony watching this, she's watching his head of fundraising. This guy worked for a nonprofit or ran a nonprofit. He's watching the head of fundraising, and she's just watching her face fall. And my client is like, I know this was a team. I know it wasn't just one person.
Yeah.
But taking all the credit. Me. So that can be a little hard to, people are like, he's not a narcissist. His whole life is about helping people. I'm like, yeah, but hold on a minute.
Sure.
How does he treat his staff? How does he treat the people around him, or her? How does she treat the people around him? And is it all sort of forward facing? Are they making sure they get credit for it? Is it about that? Or are they just doing it behind the scenes, and nobody really knows like how much money they give? Or, I'm not a big fan of people's names on buildings. I'm like, what the hell? Just do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I consider that narcissistic. Wouldn't say everyone with their name on a building is a narcissist. I wouldn't say that, but I do think it's a little I'm going to get credit for this, rather than it's about everyone now has a place to study. Isn't that cool? So,
Yeah. So it's possible to, based on what you just said, is it possible that you have some of the behaviors? So you have the narcissistic behavior there, but doesn't necessarily lead to actually living as a narcissist. Is that it?
yeah. And that's probably even rude of me to say that putting your name on a building is narcissistic, because it's also it's also what is socially done. And
Right.
so, it's just what we do. So somebody may do that because they've never thought about it, and they want their kids to see it. So that doesn't necessarily mean it. But yeah, people can have certain things they do that are narcissistic, but not really, um, have the full-blown disorder
Mm,
where they're really causing a lot of harm. Now, I
right.
want to say being proud of yourself, taking credit for where credit is due to you,
Mm,
even posting that you lost 20 pounds on social media or whatever, that's not necessarily narcissistic. Being proud of yourself is not narcissistic. And some people say, well, we should all be a little bit narcissistic. I'm like, I want to make a distinction.
mm,
I'm not looking for supply if I'm just proud of a genuine accomplishment. I don't consider that narcissistic. I
yeah.
consider that healthy pride.
Okay. Yeah, it's a nice distinction. I have to ask the question, is there a rough ratio between men and women who are
Oh,
narcissistic?
okay. So here's what I've heard. And by the way, let me say something. Since we were talking about research before, let's talk a little bit about the research, and then I'll answer the question.
Mm,
So anytime we ask anything about narcissism, here is the challenge. Narcissists do not self-identify. And I
mm,
had to, speaking of vocabulary, Wayne, I had to learn a new word. And the word that I learned was two new words: ego syntonic and ego dystonic.
mm,
And basically, an ego dystonic disorder, like dissonant, dystopia,
right.
dystopia. An ego dystonic disorder is like or OCD or depression. You
Mhm,
don't want to have it. It bothers you. It's upsetting. It's like, oh my God, am I ever going to stop going back to check I have a little tiny bit of OCD. I sometimes check my stove, or did I lock the door? Did I get the garage door down? Like that. And it doesn't feel good to have it, right? It dissonant. Ego syntonic is it doesn't bother you. It might bother other people. Ego
mm,
syntonic is like having COVID with no symptoms. Like, I'm fine. And meanwhile, you might be infecting everyone else. Narcissism is an ego syntonic disorder. It doesn't bother the narcissist.
mm,
Now, I can talk a little bit more about that. So the problem with researching them is they don't come looking for help for themselves. The people that come looking for help are all the people that have been abused by a narcissist in the workplace, in the family, in intimate partnerships, even in friendships. They come looking for help, like the COVID infected people. The narcissist goes on their merry way and doesn't think anything's wrong with them. They
mm,
can't see it. So it's hard. If I want to study depression, you could put an ad in the paper and go, are you depressed? Come and be part of this study. We're looking for a cure. And you get tons of people and you make sure they fit the criteria.
mhm.
You can't say, we want to treat narcissism. Are you a narcissist? I'm not a
Yeah.
narcissist. I think my wife is, though, right? Because they don't come. So I'm being a little funny and I'm being a little broad. You have to do a different research study and then kind of do a broader personality trait and look to see if they check the box for some narcissistic traits. And I've seen more of those. And so I think we're getting more research. Now, you can study psychopaths. There's more research on psychopaths than on narcissists, I think.
Mhm.
Because why? Because they're in jail. They're in jail. And as one researcher explained it to me, number one, they're in jail. They're bored. They love attention. And they actually, you can call them whatever because it doesn't affect them. It's not shaming to them. I mean, they might not identify that way. And they would love to get out of jail for the day and come and go into a magnetic resonance imaging machine in your lab.
Mm, mm, yeah.
So it's this undiagnosed, you know, they don't feel or if they do experience problems, it's because life is unfair. Nobody treats me the way that I should be treated. It's all sort of external.
Mm.
That's when they might seek help. But if a good therapist or coach is like, hey, what's the common denominator? You've been married 5 times and it's all about how bad they are. Like, what's going on with you? They'll leave. You call them out, they're done often. And there's a few rare exceptions to this, but for the most part, they're hard to study. So all of that having been said,
Yes.
Romney says that this is what she says. I do tend to trust her on this, that it used to be that there were more men than women, and it's been evening out.
Mm. I almost feel good to hear that last part, but of course it's not the right topic for anything to be balanced. But yeah,
Unfortunately.
why would that be the case though? Like, so what's changing for women that's leading them to become more narcissistic?
I think I think it's probably social media.
Mm.
And the very strong, I think there's 2 things: social media, the strong emphasis on external validation, externalization. What do you like? There's that.
Mm.
But you know, I'm also very, very reluctant to say this person who, posts a lot of pictures on themselves as a narcissist, they might be actually unless I knew them, they might actually be really insecure,
Mm.
or just be having a good time and want to share that. So we don't know for sure.
Mm.
That's part of it. I think maybe a bigger part. So this is very interesting. As I understand it, societies that are more communal have less narcissism. And
Okay.
here's why. Because when a child acts in a way that is not in alignment with community standards, that isn't sort of how we do this in our community, what is it to be following the values of our community? Other adults feel free to call them out. And so it often gets nipped in the bud earlier.
Mm.
Now we're losing those societies, but
Yeah.
you don't, historically, you haven't found as much in societies that have more value on being more communal. Um, and I think part of what's been happening, I would say, my suspicion, and I don't have the research on this, is more so than social media, it's the lack of controls. It's we tolerate it and even celebrate it.
Mm.
We're tolerating it more, and celebrating it, and not putting our foot down allows it to flourish.
Okay. It doesn't bode well for the future, I would say, then listening to that.
Okay, but here's what does, though. Podcasts like this, because at the same time, so somebody asked me, I was at a coaching thing, in a coaching gathering, we were all like at the brew pub, and I sat next to this woman, and she, asked me a good coaching question: what's got you interested right now? I mean, I love coaches, and I'm like, oh, I'm doing all this work on narcissism. And she said to me, isn't that word overused?
Mm.
And I said, I have an opinion about that. I actually think in my generation, I'm very, very early Gen X. I identify as very early Gen X, almost baby boomer. In my generation and in the boomer generation, it is not being used enough. It
Mm.
is underused. For millennials and Gen Zs, maybe it's a bit overused. It's like everything's trauma. I can't find my nail broke and it's trauma. And, this person, told me to be quiet. What a narcissist. Like that.
Mm.
In the workplace and in leadership, it's still Gen Z and boomer, and we are not recognizing it enough.
To
And
that
so,
point,
go ahead.
I apologize. To that point, there's a word that's a little bit foreign to me, but it seems to be very commonplace now: gaslighting.
Yes.
This part of this
It's
whole.
It's part of the vocabulary. Let me talk about that in a second. What I was going to say is, so I think that one of it's the I follow a couple that does work on cults, which I also have done a lot of studying about, because all cults are led by narcissists. Um, and they said they have this podcast. It's called A Little Bit Culty. It's really good. They're very good. And they talk about this being the golden age of cult recovery. This is the
Wow.
golden age of narcissistic awareness. So it does bode well for the future, because what is
Mm,
happening is that language, like gaslighting last year was word of the year.
mm.
People are having more awareness. I'm on a Facebook group. What is it called? There are Facebook groups all over the world for women, and I think it's something like, "Are we dating the same guy?" And people go on there. This is hilarious. I only know this from one of my students, and I started following. I'm not dating, but I started following one just to see what was there. And people will post pictures. I'm started dating this guy. Are there any red flags? Now, what's really lovely about it is that women will come on and go, "No, that's my brother's friend. He's awesome. He's great." Or they'll come on and they'll go like, "Yeah, he's got 3 restraining orders, don't go there. He broke my nose." So they're supporting each other. And I will tell you,
Wow.
if you're in any major city that has Facebook, I know they don't in Shanghai, but you will find thousands of people, women on here. We're watching out for each other. This would be more in the dating situation. But we also
Mm,
have things like Glassdoor in the business world,
yeah.
where, people are starting to notice this. I have a friend who works, and then I will do gaslighting. I have a friend who does a lot of like work with young people. She's an expert on generations,
Mm,
and she like talks a lot with young people. And she's saying they are starting to say to me things like, how was the interview? Well, I went for the interview, but the hiring manager really seemed narcissistic, so I walked away. So watch out, watch
wow.
out in the workplace. If you fit some of these characteristics and you've been able to get away with it for years, these generations, they're too hip to it. They might
Mm,
overcompensate, but you cannot get away with not being collaborative, not being warm and opening, devaluing, throwing people under the bus, taking credit for their things, making people walk on eggshell. That is not going to last, because this generation will not stand for it. Yay.
That's fantastic. I have to say. I mean, just looking at my career, it's an ancient career, but look, when I look at the leaders around me, gosh, so many of them I could categorize in this bracket. So I'm very um, moved by that suggestion that the younger
Absolutely.
generations are more attuned to it, aware of it, and reacting against it. So that's a
Yeah,
good
they
thing.
might, like many things, and if you watch history and you watch organizations, it might swing to one side for a while, and they might be like, anybody else, like, that guy's not a narcissist, you overreacted. But I think that's how we find the balance and find our way forward as healthier organizations. If you can't find people to work with you because word is out that you're abusive, that's a good thing for the world. Either then, as a leader, I have to change, I have to really change,
Mm,
um, or my business will tank. So gaslighting it's a form of, it comes from a movie that's from
okay.
the 40s, I think, the movie Gaslight, where the guy marries this woman to get her inheritance, and then he drives her crazy. And one of the things he does is he makes the gaslights flicker. And she says, the gaslights are flickering. And he's like, "Oh, I don't know what's wrong with you." And so it's basically lying with the intent to make the person doubt themselves.
Mm,
And it's very destabilizing. So a boss might do it, a narcissistic boss might say, "Where's that report? You know, I gave it to you on Friday." "No, you didn't." "No, I put it in your inbox." "No, you didn't. I just looked and there's nothing there." And then the person is like, "Am I crazy? I literally remember going into the office." How you know that you are being gaslit or gaslighted is one of the tells is you find yourself writing everything down, because it's designed to make you crazy and doubt yourself. And so
mm,
I had a friend who was married to a woman who was very narcissistic, and he would like lend her money. She needed money and he lent her money, and um and then and then with the agreement, like, I'll give you back the money out of my paycheck. And then he would come and say, okay, it's Friday, where's my money? And she'd be like, I never promised to pay you back. You told me not to worry about it. You gave that to me. He said, I started journaling because I thought I was going crazy. And I would write down, lent so-and-so money. She promised to pay me back, just so. And so then he said, she would say that, I'd go back in my journal. And then she would just say, oh, you must have written it down wrong. You can see how it would have such a stress load. Now, here's the thing. Organizations cannot really, so I want to say something about the myth of like, well, but they make good leaders, or look at all the innovation. Organizations are not strong with narcissistic leaders because everyone's nervous system is on alert. And if your nervous system is on alert, you cannot think as clearly. You will not be as creative. Somehow it's doing this. Zoom is doing this thing. You can make it make hearts. Did you know that? You're
I
gonna
like
do
it.
it? There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Very
Okay.
good.
So people give the example, and I will name a name because he's dead. Like Steve Jobs, look at Steve Jobs, look at what he created. I always say, we don't know what he killed. We don't know. He had a reputation for yelling at engineers until they felt like they were 3 years old, right? I mean, that's documented. We don't know what that person who went into his office with an idea and was ripped apart, and then probably had to spend a week putting, if not longer, maybe never, putting themselves back together so they could focus again, because this is what it does to the brain. We don't know what they could have created. So let's stop saying, but look at all the innovation, look at all that. We don't know what they're killing because it never existed. Also, people like that love to take credit for what other people have done. So we also don't know, was this really your idea? Or how would it, like, where's the team? Nothing happens that's of value in an organization that a team doesn't touch. And so I think they get credit where credit is often. Like Elon Musk, I'm sorry, I will name names there. He didn't create any of that stuff, but he's just a good marketer, right? Give him credit for all of this that he didn't create. He's a very, very classic narcissist, by the way, which I shouldn't say because I've not sat with him, but evidence is grandiose. He's taking credit for things that he doesn't deserve credit for. And yet most of the work, but he's just a good marketer. So sometimes that happens. But yeah, I always wonder about the engineers that walked out of Steve Jobs' office or quit, or were so lost all their confidence. Maybe we would have a cure for global warming.
Yeah. And we're really stretching.
Yeah, we're out of time. Okay.
I mean, we could literally talk for ages on this topic. It's such a broad topic. It's a really insightful conversation. So I appreciate so much you sharing your knowledge and your insights. I do want to finish with the poem. So
it's a very short one. It's very, very short. Okay. And it's a poem I wrote about coaching. It's called Invitation. And I feel like this is how our clients, our non-narcissistic clients, our clients who really want to be in coaching, it's how they see us. So it's very short. Invitation. There's a door I want to pass through, and you've offered to hold it open so I can stand and look at a distant land. It's bright there, and fun, and terrifying. And you never stop saying, I see you here. And this statement of belonging, which you speak so matter-of-factly, buoys me, calms my heart, and carries me over the threshold to where I want to be.
very nice. Very nice.
Thank you.
What
Thank
do you have?
you.
You have an actual book of
I do.
poems published?
It's on Amazon. It's called Coaching the Spirit.
Coaching the Spirit.
Poems of Transformation, and it's really somewhat about the coaching process, and I wrote it with a leadership trainer friend of mine. So yeah.
Very nice. Ann Betz, such a great conversation. Thank you once again for joining the ET project, and I really look forward to staying in contact this time.
Absolutely. Super fun conversation, Wayne. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Oh, people can always connect with me on LinkedIn, by the way, if you want to reach out and connect, find me on LinkedIn.
We will put all the links
Okay.
in our notes, but fantastic, and thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.